My love of reading fiction led us to interview a truly historical figure this week. We are honored to talk to groundbreaking musician, journalist, novelist, filmmaker, and activist Gabriel Rotello.
After leaving college, Gabriel Rotello was a New York City keyboard player, arranger, and music director. And in 1979, he co-founded the underground band Brenda and the Real Tones. He collaborated with practically every musician in the New York City underground and punk scene in the 1980s and was a mainstay of the famous CBGB's Music Club. We discovered Gabriel through his new novel, The CBGB Conspiracy, which interweaves his own experience with an engaging murder mystery. Welcome to the show, Gabriel.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Off mic, we were just talking about the fact that the more I learned about your life, the more nervous I got about talking to you. You have done a hell of a lot of stuff, and I'm starting out this episode asking you to come back someday because there's no way we can get to everything I want to talk to you about. But I would like to start with the music because although it was a novel that brought me in, the CBGB Conspiracy is a novel I found out through, I think, just kind of a solicitation email somewhere along the line. Bought the book, read it, really, really enjoyed it, and then reached out to you hoping you might have some time to talk to us. But even the novel is really grounded in the music scene in the 70s, the punk scene in New York City. And as I said, when I started looking at your bio and realized that you weren't just writing about it, you basically lived it. And I'd love to hear a little bit about what happened and how you got there and how you kind of went through that really interesting period of time.
Well, I lucked out from a time point of view because I moved to New York when I was 21, which was 1974. And that was a time when New York City was really hitting rock bottom. People that know New York today as this, particularly Manhattan, as this place of the playground of millionaires. It's unrecognizable from what it was like back then when the city was really falling apart. It was going bankrupt. There was massive crime. There was what they called white flight, where people were leaving the city in droves. The population dropped by 1 million people, which, was a terrible thing, I guess, for the city, but it was great if you were young because
Right.
it meant that it was very inexpensive and you could live in Manhattan, in downtown Manhattan for cheap. My first apartment was $90 a month.
Is that
Um,
right? Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
And everybody had that experience. If you didn't have any money, you could move to New York anyway and just get a little job as a bike messenger or working at the Strand bookstore, which is what I did, my first job. And you could live in Manhattan. And just at that moment, this new musical scene began to appear around a club on the Bowery called CBGB, which had been opened by Hilly Crystal a few years before. It was a very unsuccessful club originally. He wanted it to be sort of bluegrass and country, and nobody wanted to go down to the Bowery to listen to bluegrass or country because the Bowery was the most famously dysfunctional street in America. It was the place where all the flop houses were for chronic alcoholics, where all the missions had their little hotels. You could rent a bed for 25 cents a night. And who
And
wanted to go
that
down?
reputation had been since long before the 70s, correct?
Turn of the century. Yeah,
Right. Okay.
it originally was a sort of a like almost like Times Square. In the 19th century, it was an entertainment district, and then it fell on hard times. Everything moved uptown, and the missions moved in and opened up flop houses there, and that was where you went if you were a chronic alcoholic and needed a place to sleep. So, but they would kick them out in the morning, and they would just people would just be lying along the streets drinking, Ripple out of paper bags or whatever.
Right.
And then at night, they would let you in. You'd give them your 25 cents or whatever it was, and they'd let you in to sleep for the night. So it was not really a place that anybody wanted to go. And so Hilly's Club was not really doing very well. And then one day, these two guys, Richard Lloyd and Tom Verlaine from the band Television, were walking up the street and saw Hilly outside working on his famous, now famous awning and said, "What is this place?" And he said, "Oh, it's this club." And they said, "Could we play here?" And he said, "Yes." And so they came a couple of weeks later and they brought a big crowd because they knew everybody on this burgeoning downtown scene where people didn't have any place to play. New York City at that time didn't have any place to play. So everybody came and Philly saw that he could get a big crowd with this kind of these kinds of people. So he began booking them into the club for residencies, not just a night, but for Thursday, Friday, Saturday for 6 weeks kind of thing. And that immediately kickstarted this enormous explosion of people. It was Patti Smith, it was Talking Heads, it was Ramones, it was television, it was Blondie, Richard Hell and the Voidoids, this whole group of people that had been germinating for the last couple of years in downtown New York, but didn't really have a place to play. Suddenly they had a place to play, and this huge scene congregated around that place. And so that is how that started. And within a couple of years, CBGB had become the most important rock club probably in the history of rock clubs. More bands were signed to record deals out of that club in those just 3 or 4 years than any other place in history, and it has since become legendary. But at the time, it was a tiny, tiny scene. I mean, that
Right.
first year or two, it was maybe 100 people, 150 people at most, who just kept going back night after night after night. And half the people in the crowd would be people in bands who would be
Right.
playing there the next week, kind of thing. It was people supporting their friends. And we had absolutely no idea that in decades to come, it would be considered this legendary place because it was just this tiny little scene in this city that was falling apart.
And that's exactly why I say the more I read about your involvement and the people that you met and were around throughout that time. For me, I'm a bit younger than you, but I knew what CBGB was. I knew what punk rock was, even if I didn't have a really good handle on it. It didn't get much chance to listen to it. I grew up kind of in small town, almost suburban America, west of there. I grew up near Pittsburgh for many years, but everywhere I lived was kind of the same town, and lots of jokes about punk rockers, lots of, not really getting a real sense of what it was like. But as I got older and realized how seminal that music was to the stuff I was listening to when I got into my, late teens and 20s, it became this kind of mecca type of place that although I never got to visit it, I just always knew it was out there. And the fact that
Yeah.
you were there at the beginning is just amazing to me.
And it was a different kind. I mean, punk rock today, I think that punk rock today, that term has come to mean a certain kind of sort of loud, three-chord, almost sort
Right.
of nihilistic, almost like what you would think of as hardcore. That people think of punk rock, they think of the Sex Pistols, they
Exactly.
think of mosh pits, they think of people screaming and yelling, and young guys that can barely play their instruments. But when you think about what it was, what the original punk rockers were, the Ramones kind of fit that bill in a sense. I mean, they play very short, very fast songs, but Patti Smith is nothing like that. Tom Verlaine and television are nothing like that. Blondie is classic sort of pop music. I mean, really crafted pop music. Talking Heads are very ethereal. The thing that attracted me to it was that it was very poetic and very literary, and it seemed like they were the successors of the Beats, who had been,
Right.
Allen Ginsberg and William Burroughs and Jack Kerouac and all those people from 15 years before. So today the term punk rock is different from what it was, what it originally was. Hilly Crystal, the guy who owned CBGBs, who became a very good friend of mine in the late 70s, 80s, hated the term punk rock. He wanted to call it
Uh,
street music because he just didn't think that that accurately portrayed what that music was really all about. It was really people on the street. It was people that didn't have much money. And it was a reaction against the complexities of 70s stadium rock, where everything was like Emerson, Lake and Palmer and ELO, that kind of thing, the big bombastic music. This was taking rock and stripping it back down to the simplest kind of music that had been in the 60s when it was very simple music and teen rebellion, basically.
it I listened to quite a few bands, quite a bit of music in anticipation of this episode, and some of them were bands that I had not really listened to in the past, who are squarely in that kind of CBGBs and punk rock category at this point. But when you listen to them, they throw back some of them throw back almost to the 50s. It does have that really early rock and roll sound, and I that's that was kind of an education for me to realize that there was the term punk is definitely not as narrow as I thought when I was 15 years old, for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the Ramones were throwing back to the Beach Boys. I know it sounds funny to think of the Ramones having anything to do with the Beach Boys, but they were
Or a
really trying,
beach.
yeah, but or a beach, but Rockaway Beach, Rockaway
Yeah,
Beach. They were trying to channel that, and Blondie was trying to channel pure '60s pop, which they ended up doing very well. And of course, Blondie became one of the biggest bands. They were as big in the late '70s, early '80s as Beyonce is today. They were a
yeah,
super group. It's amazing how many bands came out of CB's, that tiny little arts scene centered below 14th Street in Manhattan in those few years, that just one band after another that just became internationally famous and remain so today. It's just incredible when you think about the amount of talent that was floating around in those days. And
yeah.
that was, again, that was all possible because New York City was cheap. Manhattan was cheap. But part of that is that everybody has to, for a scene like that to happen, people all have to live in the same basic area. You know what I mean? They have to
Right.
know each other. They have to interact with each other. They have to not just play in the same club, but they have to hang out and become friends with each other and have sex with each other and have fights with each other and influence each other. And you can't have that if you have a city that's so expensive that people have to live in far-flung, way out in Queens, way out in Brooklyn, Staten Island, across the river in Hoboken. You don't get that connectivity. And in those days, we had that connectivity because New York City was collapsing and falling apart, and it was cheap.
It's interesting you bring that up because we have somehow created these little pockets of musical, these geographic areas that have an independent music scene, but they're not in the cities anymore. They're, for example, where I live in Joliet, Illinois, or Reading, Pennsylvania. We have this weird connection with Reading, Pennsylvania, because one of our best friends is a drummer who plays for like six bands there. And we got an opportunity to talk to those musicians, and what they discuss is that interaction and playing in each other's bands and seeing each other play, and you can just feel the connection they have with each other. And there's a lot of really good original music coming out of Joliet and coming out of Reading and coming out of the areas in North Carolina near where Chris lives. And the good news, I guess, is it seems like it's still going on. It's just, and maybe it's even good news that it's spreading out over the country a little bit more.
Yeah, it's an open question. I mean, just a completely different world. There is so much music being made now because you no longer have gatekeepers and you no longer need to go into a studio and spend thousands of dollars to make a demo. You can just do it in your bedroom using your computer and some sort of music software. That people, I think, are almost overwhelmed with the amount of music that there is, and that makes it difficult for anybody to break through because there's just so much stuff and this
Yeah.
proliferation of genres and all of that. And then the thing about being spread out, I don't really know about that. I mean, if you look back in history, the great moments in history, ancient Athens, where everybody, you think of all, Euripides and Sophocles and Plato and Aristotle, and, everybody was all in this one little town, or the Florence, Italy in the Renaissance, or Paris in the 1920s, or the beat scene in New York in the 1950s. I mean, when you go back through history, almost every time there's a local movement that becomes actually a movement, like a scene that explodes and becomes a movement that defines a generation. It comes from a big city where people are all crammed
Right.
together in one small neighborhood of that city, or a place like Paris, which isn't that big, where everybody's just basically in the left bank kind of thing. And then because it's in a big city, it has the ability to generate out from there across the country. There's very few movements that define a generation and a time that you can think of back historically that came from little towns and villages that were separated and spread out all over the place, even though that's always happening. And it's fantastic that it's happening. And if you can no longer afford to do it in a big city, it's great that people are doing it in Joliet, Illinois. I happen to live now in Danbury, Connecticut, and there's a very vibrant, it's a small town, it's like 80,000 people. There's a very vibrant music scene here. There's music, there's live music almost every night, and a lot of it is really, really, really good, but it's never going to burst out and affect the culture the way that scenes that are much larger and happen in big cities do. So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, I can see that, and you're right. I guess one of the biggest complaints that Chris and I tend to have is that these people that we think are really good that are playing in Reading or playing in Joliet, nobody else knows who they are,
Nobody knows who they
and
are.
like you
Yeah.
said, there's a lot of noise out there at this point. It's hard to get heard. Let me ask you this, because so many of the names and bands and figures that you've just described in talking about New York in that era kind of float through, and some of them are central to the novel that you wrote, the mystery novel that you wrote.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I really got from that book was the sense that you know it was clear that you knew this era, you knew this place, you know that you knew those people, and you know as I read more about you, I realized that was actually true, and it wasn't just that you had a great imagination, you also had all this experience in knowing these people. How did that happen? You said you moved into New York City at 21. Were you playing in a band? Did you? What exactly brought you into that fold?
Right. I was trained as a classical musician originally, and I wanted to become a rock and roll musician, but I knew about music. I knew how to write music. I knew how to arrange music, and I immediately got jobs in New York writing and arranging music for bands, working for record companies, etc., doing lead sheets, helping people copyright music, etc. And the CBGB's thing happened because one of my closest friends was Richard Soul, who was the keyboard player of this new band, the Patti Smith Group, that no one had ever heard of. And he and I were boyfriends together for a brief while. I'm gay and he was gay, and the way things worked in the 70s, you had a
Sure.
boyfriend that lasted for about 3 weeks, and then you became really close friends after that. And that's how you developed your thing. And one day he came to me and said, we're playing at this new place next Thursday night. Why don't you come? It's called CBGB. I know it's down on the Bowery, and you probably don't want to go down there, but come anyway. And so I came, and it had just started. I think it was Patty's first time playing at CBGB.
Whoa,
And
really?
it was only a month or two after after television had first started playing there. They were the first sort of punk group that played there. And I just walked in and looked around and said, "This is fantastic." I mean, it had a great sound system. The CBGB's was a dump. I mean, it was so skanky you could not believe it. It smelled, it was sticky, it was dirty, it was filthy. And outside on the street there were bodies lying around. You were on the Bowery at night. It was crazy. But the sound system was absolutely fantastic. And as a musician, you care a lot about that. So it would just do a natural thing. So I just started going there all the time. And I lived nearby because everybody lived nearby. I just lived, walk there in 5 minutes. So it just became a thing. And of course, no one was famous. That everybody was completely, totally unknown and really poor, had no money whatsoever. And everyone was very friendly. And you could get to meet everybody on that scene if you just went there for a few weeks. Within a few weeks, you would pretty much know everybody who was there. So that is how I got on that scene. And then I ended up playing there. I had my own band in the later 70s, the Grown Ups, and Hilly Crystal became one of our biggest sort of patrons and thought that we were going to become, big rock stars, which never happened. But Hilly thought it was going to happen. And then that's when he and I became very good friends in the late 70s and 80s. But that is how I got on that scene. And I think that's how most people got on that scene. You just showed up and there was a cover, but if Hilly thought that that you had talent, you had something to say, and you were broke, he would let you in for free. So it was the clubhouse.
That really comes through in the novel, by the way. The
Yeah.
idea of people just on the street walking to or from or past CBGBs and knowing someone on the street or getting pulled in just because you happen to see somebody you knew. All of that really comes through in the novel, I think, very, very
Yeah.
clearly.
And that novel, I mean, I wrote it. People had been urging me to write a memoir. I would tell stories all the time, and people say, "Oh, you got to write a memoir because that's such a great story. You have a million of these great stories." And
Mm.
I just felt, as a gay person, writing a memoir about the 70s in New York would be very, very emotionally painful because then the 80s happened, and that was the era of the AIDS epidemic. And most of my friends, half of my friends, two-thirds of my friends died of AIDS in the 80s. And it was just not something that I really wanted to put myself through. But then one day I thought, wait a minute, what if I bring those friends back to life, but in a novel, like a fun thing? I just pick a thing that they're going to be doing in one particular time period in, say, 1977, and bring them back in a novel. And so that was the genesis of the CBGB conspiracy, was to basically bring everybody back to life, not as the true story of what happened, as my memories of a memoir, but rather as a novel, a constructed murder mystery with a really fun mystery at the center of it. And that was the genesis of that. And I picked 1977 because it has been described as the coolest year in hell. It was the year that New York City went bankrupt. It was the year of the Son of Sam serial killing murders that were going on in the outer boroughs. It was the year of the great blackout, when the lights went out in New York City on the hottest night of the summer during a huge heat wave, and the city just exploded into riots and looting, etc. For the gay world, it was the year of the great Everard bathhouse fire, this horrible fire in a bathhouse in which many, many people were killed. Never determined what the cause of it was. And I thought, how could I take all these disasters? Plus, it was the year that CBGB's, it was the most creative year. People they call it the coolest year in hell because 77 was sort of the peak of this explosion of creativity. So you have this explosion of creativity in this city that's just melting down. And how could I tie all of those things together in the plot of a murder mystery? So it was a real fun sort of challenge tying them all together. And that's what I was trying to do.
And succeeded as far as I'm concerned. Chris and I
Yeah.
both have read the book.
I'm an historian, at least by training, but that's not at all what I do. Fortunately, I deal with IT stuff that sidetracks me from the beginning of the interview. But it's one of the best meldings of like just a fascinating story. It's a great mystery, and then the backdrop is just perfectly captured, all those historical events. Because sometimes pulling those together, I don't think always works out well. This is one of the better books I've read in a really long time. I really commend you. It was great.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, in my notes, I wrote that it felt very Elroy-esque to me for a number of reasons. One of them being the historical figures that kind of move in out, or you feel on the edges of the book. But it really did bring you into that world in a way that, again, Chris and I are almost exactly the same age. We knew of that scene, but we didn't. We were a little too young to really be able to even take part in our own small way. We just kind of heard about it, read about it. Generally, we heard what our parents were saying, which meant that it wasn't drawn in a very flattering manner. But again, the older you get, and the more you hear about the just burst of creativity, and in particular what was going on at that club at that time, I thought the book really brought us into that world in a way that I hadn't seen before.
Well, it was really fun to write it. It brought me back. I felt a very strong sense of closeness to my departed friends, because most of the characters, for listeners who are unaware, it's a murder mystery, but most of the characters are real people from that era. The main characters were all friends of mine. They are all deceased. And they were all public figures. They're people that became famous. Many of them became
Mm-hmm.
famous in the later years, but they're famous now. So you're allowed to do that. So it's considered to be a historical novel
Right.
because it's got real people in it, even though the story is fictional. But it was really fun, and I just had a ball writing it. And whenever you do a project, whether it's a music project or a literary project, I'm a television producer now. When you do a TV show, when you're really having fun doing it, in the process of making it, you're just constantly going, "Oh, this is so great! This is so much fun." You pretty much know that people are going to like it
Yeah.
because if you're having fun making it, then it's probably going to be pretty good. And I had a ball. And the biggest compliment that I have gotten from it is are from people that were there who were alive at the time, and there's quite a number of people that are still alive who were there at that time, who have read it and said, "Oh my God." It just brought me back. Like
Oh,
I had
that's that's
forgotten what it felt like, and I had forgotten what it smelled like. And I was reading the book, and suddenly I was like hurtled back to this moment when I was in my 20s, 50 years ago, and I could just smell everything and taste everything and feel everything. And I just think that's fantastic. I just
oh,
love
it
it when people
is.
say that. Yeah.
The ability to do that, it's really special because there's a book Tom and I read when we were in college, and it was a Thomas Harris book, so it was a serial killer book. And one of the big scenes happens literally like right down the street from where we were at college, and it made it scary as hell because like
Yeah.
we knew the area, we knew the place.
Yeah.
But that's you feel like you're transported back to this time period, and I didn't imagine the smells, but I could almost imagine everything else, which, as I said, that's a gift. It was really cool. Can I shift it a little bit?
Yeah.
This whole idea about CBGB is about that perfect moment where all the conditions came together. Were there other clubs that had a chance and just didn't do it, or was it just that CBGB had everything?
Well, it was the first place that people had to play. There had been a dearth of places to play in the early 70s in New York, which just seems really strange. I mean, New York's a giant
Right.
city, and why wouldn't there be a million rock clubs? Well, just for whatever reason, there were not. There had been in the 60s, and then they kind of closed, and then there was a period of several years where there was just no place to play. And CB's was the first place. So that was reason number one, was that it was the first place. The reason number two was Hilly Crystal himself, the owner of CB's, was a wonderful, wonderful person and just so nurturing and so supportive. And he would do something that nobody else really did, which was he would give people residencies. Rather than
Hmm.
just playing, you get a gig on a Thursday night, and then a month and a half later, you have a gig on a Saturday night, and you go 6 weeks without playing. He would let you play Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday, for weeks at a time. And that is incredibly important from a musical point of view. Everybody that played at CB's, when I first started going, when I first saw Patti there the first time, actually, the Patti Smith group was pretty good right from the beginning, but most of them were terrible. Blondie sucked. The Ramones were horrible. The Talking Heads were embarrassing. I mean, you just cringed. But Hilly saw something in them and he let them come back. And by coming back and playing in front of a live audience,
Sure.
night after night, week after week, any musician will tell you that 5 minutes playing in front of an audience is a better rehearsal than 5 hours of just playing in your garage or your basement because there's people out there listening. You have to get it together. Things begin to happen. And so he provided people with that opportunity. And you literally watched people go from really terrible to pretty good to wow, they really are good to internationally famous recording artists in the course of like a couple of years. And nobody else did that. But there was a second club that became a rival to CB's almost immediately, which was Max's Kansas City.
Okay.
Max's had
Okay.
been a famous club in the 60s, not because it was a music club, it was a restaurant, but it was where Andy Warhol hung out. The back room at Max's was this legendary place. And then it kind of went on hard times for a while, and Mickey Ruskin, who owned it, left, and it was taken over by other people. And then they saw what CBGB's was doing, and they began to do the same thing. And they became these two poles. You played at CB's and then you played at Max's, and you played at CB's and you played at Max's. And there was even a rivalry between them. There were some bands that were more Max's, some bands that were more CB's. I think honestly that CB's is more famous today than Max's. Primarily, I know it seems odd to say, but primarily because of the T-shirt. There's that CBGB T-shirt that you see all over the
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
And young people
Yeah.
see that and go, "What's that?" And they find out about CB's, and there is no well, actually, there is. I have a Max's T-shirt, but there is no Max's T-shirt that is like that, that is mass produced and that you can buy all over the country. But there were those two clubs, and then because of their success, lots of other clubs opened, and then the '80s happened, and New York was just there were clubs everywhere, a massive music scene. But CB's, for a bunch of reasons, it became so important.
Now, I've been assuming this, but I want to ask you outright. Did you play there yourself? Did you play with some of these bands as well as your own? I know you mentioned the band that you yourself were in, but did you play with Patti Smith, for example, on
I
their
didn't.
stage?
No, I didn't play with Patty. I mean, Richard Soul, my friend, was Patty's keyboard player.
Hmm.
Each of these groups was a very self-contained group, and I wasn't in any of those groups. I did work for them. I did, for example, Patty. You know, songbooks where you can buy a songbook that
Right.
has somebody. So Patty hired me to write the piano arrangements in her songbook. So you can still, it's a collector's item now. And the Blue Oyster Cult did the same thing, and I copyrighted Tom Verlaine's music for him. I did the lead sheets for their first album. So I worked with a lot of those people, but I wasn't in any of those bands because they were self-contained bands. Jimmy Destry, my friend Jimmy Destry, was the keyboard player of Blondie. I mean, I knew not all bands even had keyboard players. Some of
Right.
them did. But no, but I did play at CBGB's very much so. I played there a lot, but not in 77. I think I first played there in 78 or 79 with my own band, with first Brenda and the Real Tones, and then the Grown Ups, and also at Max's Kansas City.
Well, you talking about everything you brought to the novel, and your own experience. The other thing you brought to the novel is your experience as a journalist and as someone who's written a lot of nonfiction work. Before finally you got around to giving us this novel, but you were doing a lot of writing prior to that. And one of the things that I learned as I started going through your biography was that you co-founded Outweek, which is a magazine that I was aware of just kind of tangentially, but knew it was out there, knew it was important, particularly in the gay community, and that you also were the first openly gay columnist at New York Newsday, which again is a newspaper we didn't get because we didn't live close enough at that time that mattered. But when did you start working as a journalist in relation to all of these other things that you were doing?
Yeah, I was in the '80s. I became more a music producer than a working keyboard player, and I began producing large shows and so on at the Limelight and the Palladium and all these giant clubs in New York. I was sort of, they called me the Ziegfeld of the downtown scene. But the AIDS epidemic was beginning to really take off, and my friends were beginning to die in droves, including my partner of 15 years who died in 1988. And I joined a group called ACT UP, which
Hmm.
was an AIDS activist group and wanted to do something more than just go to demonstrations and get arrested and that kind of thing. And so I founded a magazine, which I was completely unqualified to do. I had no background, but it was the age of activism. You just get it. You raise the money. You just do it. You just did it. And to my surprise, it just took off like a rocket. And suddenly, I was the editor in chief of it. And I had such a huge talent pool to choose from. All the people in ACT UP who were just brilliant kids. Everybody was like in their early mid 20s. And really, really dedicated because it was a life-threatening emergency that we were living through. So that took off, and suddenly I just woke up one day and I was an editor in chief and a writer. And then I was hired to be the first openly gay columnist for a major American newspaper. And suddenly I wasn't doing music anymore. And I thought, well, I'll just do this for a year or two to get things off the ground. And 10 years went by. And then the AIDS epidemic sort of abated. And I didn't really feel that I needed to keep doing that because people were not dying. The drugs came online and people's lives were now being saved. But it just seemed too late to go back to music. By now, I was in my sort of later 40s and or mid 40s, I guess, and the music industry had changed enormously. So I was like, well, what could I do that would use my musical experience producing and my journalism experience? And the answer was TV documentaries. So I went to Hollywood and became a TV documentary producer for MTV and VH1 and AMC and Bravo and HBO and all these different places. And I've been doing that for 25 years, and it sort of combines my knowledge of music and putting on a show, basically, with writing and researching and all that kind of thing.
You'll have to forgive us. We're not going to ask a lot of questions about the documentarian side of your career, but frankly, that's because I just want you to come back. So, and we are very shortly going to get into the third song in of it all, which is we're going to have you help us put together a playlist. But there are so many questions I have about that phase of your career, and I'm just hoping that you're willing to come back at some point because
Absolutely, absolutely.
plus I also have more of your books to read, so I want to read those before we talk next because you've written some I think based upon the reviews and the descriptions I've had some pretty seminal works relating to the AIDS epidemic and your work as an activist. And those books, as well as the CBGB Conspiracy, can be found on your website. I want to make sure we tell people that you can go to GabrielRotello.com. I'm going to spell it GabrielRotello.com. And you can find those books because I've looked. You can find them on Amazon. You can basically find them wherever you buy books online. If that's what you're looking for, ask for them at your bookstore. I've so far only read the novel, and I can't wait to read this other work. But again, that's just going to be an excuse for you to get another email from me.
And also, by the way, Outweek magazine is on that site as well. There's a link. All of Outweek has been digitized,
Oh, I missed that.
and you can click on a link on my website, and it will take you to the Outweek website where you can read the whole Outweek magazine if you want.
Absolutely. I strongly recommend that you go to GabrielRotello.com for that information. However, because of our time frame, I think it's time for us to jump into our special playlist.
Theme that Gabriel picked was first albums from the first generation of CBGB bands. This was a bit of a challenge for me because, as Tom said earlier, I hadn't listened to a ton of this, but I now have some new music to listen. Well, it's funny, new music to listen to
Right,
because I
right.
haven't listened to some of this in a while. So, Gabriel, do you have the list in front of you of the songs you
I
submitted, or do
do,
you want us to?
yes.
Okay, great. If you want
The
to just,
first one was Free Money by Patti Smith from her Horses album. This is a song that she wrote about growing up poor in New Jersey and her mom playing the lottery and dreaming about escaping from poverty. And one reason I love it, it has a beautiful piano introduction by Richard Soul, who passed away many years ago. But he was a fantastic keyboard player, and it opens with an absolutely beautiful, ethereal piano intro. And then it is a classic example of Patty's poetry and her ability to really just nail it.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful, beautiful song.
that I get the second song, but the first song that I picked for the playlist is someone I not listened to much, but now listening to a lot more is Mink DeVille's "I Broke That Promise." Much more of a soul sound, a little bit Latin infused. There's some cool talking parts, which I really enjoyed, and very different than what I'm usually listening to. And I could try to imagine what Mink DeVille might sound like live. It was really great. That first album
Yes,
was really good.
Willie DeVille was another major figure on that scene. And yeah, I mean, again, that's an example of how many other people, because I hadn't even mentioned Willie DeVille, Mink DeVille, in talking about this, but of course, he was right there at the ground floor, as they say.
So I've got the third pick on the playlist, and I want to point out just a kind of cool coincidence. I was driving back from a soccer game with one of my sons, who is 19, and kind of out of nowhere, he started explaining to me the music he's been listening to recently. And in this day and age, it comes up primarily because we share an Apple account. So I see his stuff will come up as recently played, and I'll be like, oh, I didn't think Tommy listened to that music. So we had a little conversation about it. And what I came to realize as he was describing it without using the term, he's basically really gotten into punk. And I said, dude, I have been listening to all of this classic, like beginning punk music that you're going to have to listen to. And I've been sending him links for the last 2 weeks or so as a result of that. So it's kind of a cool coincidence that he's found a lot of post-punk bands and bands that at least pay homage to Patti Smith and the Ramones and to Blondie to a lesser extent. And I'm like, hey, first of all, listen to them. And second of all, here's a whole bunch of other bands I just learned about. And one of those was Dead Boys from an album. They came out in 1977 called Young, Loud, and Snotty. Now one of my top 5 ever album titles. And the song that I wanted to put on the playlist is Sonic Reducer. And to me, it just feels like a punk ode to punk. And it's got kind of a almost nonsense repeating chorus that comes through, and it's just so much fun to listen to. And it's exactly along the lines of the stuff that Tommy has discovered recently, because it's just really driving and really fun to listen to. And it has that, to me, that throwback even to the 50s and 60s feel of that I didn't realize necessarily was in punk in the first place.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Cheetah Chrome.
That takes us back around to your second pick for the playlist.
Okay, so my second pick is Blitzkrieg Bop by the Ramones. This is a very
Yeah.
well-known song, and people do that chant now all the time. Hey ho, let's go. I love it because it's a classic example of how punk is not really what people think of as punk. It's a very fun song that people play at sporting events, whatever. It's not exactly angry, freak out guys, on heavy duty drugs or anything like that. It's a really fun song. They wanted to have a song with a catchy chant, based upon the Bay City Rollers, who had that chant Saturday night.
That's hilarious.
Yes, and they got Hey Ho. This is just a funny little strange aside. They got the Hey Ho, Let's Go was inspired by High Low Tipsy Toe from the 1963 song Walking the Dog by Rufus Thomas, which was then covered by the Rolling Stones on the Rolling Stones' first album. And the reason why that appeals to me so much is because I actually ended up playing with Rufus Thomas in the late 70s, early 80s, when he was a much older person and I was his sort of house band kind of guy, his keyboard player and music director decades later. So I love that the Ramones were basically borrowing from Rufus Thomas from 1963. But that's an example of their taste, that they were reaching way, way back.
It's always amazing how stuff that we consider to be very original, very groundbreaking, is always standing on the shoulders of something else.
Yeah.
It just always goes back to, at least partially, to somebody else.
All right, my second song. It's not as catchy as Blitzkrieg Bop, but it's not too far off. Highlights the catchy nature of some of these songs. Is I went with the Dictators. I live for cars and girls. It's not satirical, I would say, but it's just playing on those classic masculine themes. But real quick, there's a band that I listened to. They weren't around very long, called the Bastard Sons, spelled S-U-N-S. I think they're out of Florida. They do a lot of songs about weed and rock, partying and all this other stuff. And the Dictators sound like they definitely inspired the sound of the Bastard Sons. I really enjoyed the first album out of the Dictators. And we're not talking about the current administration.
My second pick for the playlist, the sixth pick on this playlist, is the song "Zombie Dance" by the Cramps, from Songs the Lord Taught Us, which came out in 1980. Again, I think just a really fun song that has that throwback feel. But it also reminded me of an interview we did not too long ago, Gabriel, with a gentleman named Rob Miller, who was one of the co-founders of the Bloodshot Records music label in Chicago. He was nice enough to talk to us. He's written a book recently about his experience, kind of similar, frankly, idea. His was nonfiction, and your book was obviously a novel, but it's a different era because his was mainly, what would you say, Chris? Early 2000s was kind of,
but 90s, 2000s.
But he's one of those music historians who just loves going back and digging deep and finding these bands. So he goes to the Cramps, and then he goes to who the Cramps went to, and he just talked a lot about that in the interview. And I picked Zombie Dance as kind of in honor of Rob and the information he gave us, because he also put us in a position where we had to go back and listen to some music we weren't familiar with, which just opens up our library that much more. So Zombie Dance will be the sixth song on the playlist, which will take us to number seven. And that's you.
Okay, yeah. So my next one is Ex Offender by Blondie. This was from their first album as well and became a hit. It was their first hit. It was written by Gary Valentine, the bass player, who is now Gary Lockman, who is a very well-known author of books about the occult, Madame Blavatsky, and people like that. He lives in the UK, and but in those days he was Gary Valentine, and he was the bass player of Blondie. He was arrested when he was 18 years old for having sex with his slightly younger girlfriend who was under 18, and they could do that at that time, and he was considered to be a sex offender. So he wrote a song about about sex offenders being a sex offender, and Debbie then changed the lyrics so that it was about a prostitute being attracted to a police officer who had arrested her, and she changed the title to Ex Offender, which made it possible to be played on the radio in those days. And it was produced by or co-produced by Richard Gotterer, who had worked with the Angels, girl groups in the 60s. And so it was reminiscent of that style, which shows that even at the very beginning of Blondie, they were already looking back to the 60s and to classic pop in the 60s. It's a great song, and everybody should know it.
Great song. Great song. I can't ever hear about Blondie without kind of going back to my, 13 or 14-year-old self. And that's the Deborah Harry I will always remember.
She just turned 80.
Ay,
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Before I forget, Tom and I always struggle with a name for these playlists. Based on a comment that Gabriel said earlier, I think we should call it the coolest playlist in hell.
I like it. I
Riffing off
like
of
it.
that. So,
I'm typing it now.
so for my third choice, went back and forth between a couple artists. One I was thinking about was the Shirts. Listened to several of their songs, but I ultimately settled on Tough Darts and their song "Your Love Is Like Nuclear Waste." I don't know that they sound like they were incredibly influential. I think they were the shirt and ties, maybe the Cars look type, influencing the Cars a little bit later, or around the same time. Hard Driving Rock. I mean, I really love that song itself. And the other thing is it fits with the type of bands that I like these days. Whatever reason, they have very, very few followers on some of the streaming services. I love trying to listen to bands that don't necessarily get the attention they deserve.
Yeah, you guys have really done your homework. I mean, Tough Darts were a major band on the scene, and you don't really hear that much about
Yeah.
them anymore, but they were terrific.
Yeah, that's one I didn't know anything about, Chris. And of course, as you said, you put your stuff on the outline after me. So that's our favorite part about this podcast, Gabriel, is making these playlists, especially when we get to make them with guests. And it's because it always turns up some music we didn't know about or that we find out about, trying to at least appear to be prepared. Uh, which actually leads me to my last choice. It is the song "Born to Lose" by Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers. The album that I listened to it from is LAMF, The Lost 77 Mixes. This song, Born to Lose, really, it's very simple. There's probably a total of about 30 words in all of the lyrics in the song, but it just gets across how tough life in the city was. And it's got, again, a driving beat that I associate with punk. And I don't think I had listened to that song, even though I've heard of it. I was aware of it, but I don't think I ever sat down and listened to it before getting ready for this podcast. And I dig it. I really like this song. So again, I've got a whole new set of songs to listen to on a regular basis.
Yeah, and Johnny was a seminal person on the scene because he was in the New York Dolls, which was the precursor to punk. David Johansen, Sylvain, Johnny Thunders. That was the group that inspired. When I talked earlier about the groups that began to show up at CBGBs after Tom Verlaine and Richard Lloyd broke into CBGBs and got Hilly to let them play there, most of those bands had been inspired by the New York Dolls. And the New York Dolls had broken up by the time CBGBs began, but Johnny continued on with a number of projects and became a very, very famous person on that scene. So good choice.
Thank you. Thank you. And that takes us to the final song, the finale of this playlist. And the honor goes to Gabriel.
So my last choice is Venus by the group Television, Tom Verlaine's band Television. Tom Verlaine he was actually Patti Smith's boyfriend for a while in the beginning there, became a real guitar hero, a genius guitar player. And their first album, the album Television, is considered by many critics to be one of the greatest rock albums of all time, although it's not as well known as many other great albums. And Venus is a particularly beautiful song that to me sort of epitomizes the kind of transcendental aspect of that era of punk. He was very influenced, as Patti Smith was, with Rimbaud. His name was Verlaine and Rimbaud in 19th century France, were these two poets that had this crazy relationship with each other. He named himself Tom Verlaine after Verlaine, and Patti Smith was, go Rimbaud, go Rimbaud. And Venus de Milo is the famous statue that doesn't have any arms in the Louvre, that famous statue that's missing arms, and his signature lyric is, I fell into the arms of Venus de Milo. It's sort of like a LSD trip that he's on, although Tom was actually very against drug use, but he had taken LSD in earlier years, and it's a throwback to that. And it's just a beautiful song. If you want to understand what Television was about and why they're so great, that song, I think it's all encapsulated in that beautiful song.
Yeah, I actually didn't realize, for some reason I glossed over it and didn't realize you had picked that song as one of your songs for the playlist. And as I was doing my research, I was like, this is the one I'm going to play. I was planning to pick Venus for my first song, and then I went back through the list and realized I couldn't do it. But that was one of those, just listening to a couple songs on that particular album, that's when I realized how kind of wide the concept of punk was back when it started, because the musicianship is incredible. It's not, hey, these guys just learned how to play the guitar a week ago, which is what lots of us thought punk was, early on. It's amazing how solid they are, and
Yeah.
that was a band that my uncle, I remember, loved, and I just never really listened to, and you beat me to it, is all I can say.
I mean, everybody in that band could have held their own in a professional jazz band.
Yeah.
I mean, they knew music that well. The same with the Patti Smith group. They all could have been jazz musicians. I mean, they knew music really, really, really well. Not the said the Ramones were not like that. The Ramones were actually very basic
Right.
guys. I one time opened for the Ramones years later, and I was backstage, and they were sitting in their dressing room, and they were playing through their entire set before they went on stage acoustically. The drummer was just playing on one of those little rubber mallets. And I was like, what are you guys doing? And they were like, we're just playing through our whole set. And I said, but you're just about to go out on stage. We're going to do the whole thing. And they said, we do this every time because we suck, basically. And you guys are good musicians, but we're terrible. And the only way that we can get through it, and it's so loud out there, we can't hear ourselves anyway. So if we play it quietly just before we go on stage, then we'll probably be pretty good. And I was just really impressed by that. I was impressed by the work ethic of doing that. When everybody else is just sitting around having a beer before they go on, they're actually running through their whole set. But also just how clever that was, and they're realizing their limitations as musicians. So there were a lot of people on the scene that were like that, and they epitomized that. But they were hard workers.
Yeah, it's
That's
such
great.
a DIY ethos, I guess, that, again, I don't think people realize. I think people thought, they just put down their beer, picked up a guitar, and said, hey, maybe I can play this. But that's not what was going on. And when you dig deeper, you realize just, how impressive that was.
Yeah.
Well, that's the 10th and final song of the playlist that we're going to call the coolest playlist in hell, a third song in playlist. You can find it on all the streaming services. And for me, this was one of the coolest playlists that I've put together. It was rewarding to listen to stuff that I hadn't. I mean, I've heard of all these bands. I just haven't, unfortunately, before now, gone back and listened to a lot of them. So this is opening up a whole new list of bands that I can listen to. And every single one that we mentioned, as Tom said, you had personal knowledge.
I know that doesn't
which is
usually
really
happen,
cool.
by the way.
Thank you so much for joining us, Gabriel. It's been a pleasure and it's really been an honor. I really enjoyed the conversation and I look forward to hopefully having you on again.
I second that entirely. Thank you so much. This was one of those just good fortune things that happened where we were able to find a guest that I think all of our listeners are really going to enjoy this episode.
Well, Chris and Tom, thank you guys so much. It was really fun talking to you, and I look forward to coming back.
Excellent.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabriel.
Bye-bye.
So now we're ready for Loft of Wisdom.
You better open up your eyes, baby, because fools do get wise.
Loft of Wisdom is where Tom and I basically add quotes to our virtual Loft of Wisdom on our website. Tom, do you want to start out with your quote of the week?
I do. I tried to find a quote that was at least somewhat related to our guest, Gabriel. And I thought about the fact that if there's a quotable person out of the New York City scene in the 70s and 80s, it's probably Lou Reed, he was a product of Andy Warhol's Factory. He's not mentioned, I don't think, in that novel. I don't remember hearing his name, but he's close enough, in my opinion. And I went to look for interesting quotes from Lou Reed, and there were a ton of them. What I've decided to go with is, I don't like nostalgia unless it's mine. And I don't know, that hits home for me. I think it's a little self-centered, I guess, but I thought it was a really funny quote from a really creative guy.
Well, you have another one on there that I almost would steal, but I don't know if we should have two quotes from the same person. I tried to give up drugs by drinking.
Yes, love that one. I also like There's a Bit of Magic in Everything and Some Loss to Even Things Out, which was actually the title of one of his albums, Magic and Loss. It was definitely close for me. It was tough to make the call, but I'm going to go with I don't like nostalgia unless it's mine.
I'm going with one sort of for two reasons. We were recording this within a week of a primetime address by our president, and I would strongly encourage you to go read Gabriel Rotello's novel that we talked about throughout this episode and figure out the connection to the novel. But the quote itself is, "You have to be a special kind of stupid to believe this bullshit," from Representative Jim McGovern out of Massachusetts. And I'm telling you, I may move to Massachusetts because I already talked about going up there, and it's a much more progressive, liberal type of politics that permeates, which is something I've not been used to for a long time. So adding that to the Loft.
Excellent. Two good choices for the Loft. You can find the Loft of Wisdom at our website, thirdsonginpodcast.com. We have this season's quotes up there to the Loft, and if you go to our archives, you can find many, many more.
All right. That's going to take us to staff picks.
Just around the corner from you.
Staff picks are our recommendations for new stuff. We like to pick new movies, new songs, new albums, new books, any kind of art that's out there that either is brand new, coming on the horizon, or in some cases, as with me this week, something that's been around that I just didn't know about.
Well, why don't we go with the older one, The Age Before Beauty?
You got it. I found a movie through a podcast. I was listening to the Rewatchables podcast with Bill Simmons, and he has a regular guest on there who I don't really know from any of his other work. I know him as being a guest on the Rewatchables, but it turns out he's also a movie producer who produced a film called Two Distant Strangers, which came out in 2020 and won the Oscar for Best Live Action Short. I don't know how I missed this because it's apparently is very well regarded, pretty popular movie. It's now streaming on Netflix. As I said, it's called Two Distant Strangers, and it's directed by Trayvon Free and stars a rap artist, actually my son Jake's favorite rap artist, Joey Badass. And it's a Groundhog Day style film, and it was created basically in the aftermath of the George Floyd incident in May of 2020. So this is all, kind of pandemic and George Floyd, all of this stuff kind of mixed up together. It makes its point about police brutality and the risk and danger that Black Americans face on a daily basis by using this Groundhog Day repeating scenario over and over throughout the film, and it does it really well. It is just, it's really powerful, and I was very surprised to see what a great job that Joey Badass did as an actor in the film, and I had no idea it existed. It's weird to me how sometimes there's these award-winning films that I just have no idea about. So I just found out about it about 2 weeks ago, listening to an episode of The Rewatchables, and I immediately went to Netflix and watched it, and I recommend it highly.
Very nice. I went with the song, not surprisingly, and the band, the Felice, I think it's called the Felice Brothers. It's Felice. Been listening to them for years. They seem to be on the precipice of releasing a new album where they re-record stuff with famous artists. So there's a song with Bright Eyes, there's a song with Dolls, and the one that I chose is a song called Aerosol Ball that they recorded with Nathaniel Rateliff, who both you and I really enjoy. Of all those songs, all those are great, but I chose this one because it's got some fun, nonsensical lyrics, which was one of the elements of some of the punk bands that we talked about for this. I want to read the closing. I'll be quick. It's just cracks me up. Well, the cat ate the rat, and the beast ate the cat, and the boy ate the beast, and the beast made him fat, and he sat in a puddle, and he paddled with a spoon, and he bloated like a bubble, and he floated to the moon. Not exactly the deep, meaningful lyrics that I usually have, but I had some fun with it. It's a great re-recording of one of the Felice Brothers songs.
It sounds like Dr. Seuss.
I know, exactly, and it's throughout the whole song. It's fun to hear both. I mean, I said it's a great. I'm looking forward to the album, but many of these singles are already released, which is one of the nice things about the streaming services.
All right, we're now ready to give you our season playlist picks. Every episode, Chris and I pick one song to add to our season 13 playlist. And typically, we try to stick to either the theme of the episode or to information or stuff we learned about our guest. And I think that's what happened this time around. What's your pick for the playlist this week?
Yeah, so my playlist pick is by the band Social Distortion, who I've talked about a decent amount on this podcast. I originally was going to pick them for the playlist with Gabriel, but as I did research, I realized that they're not really a first-gen CBGB band, which was the point of this. They didn't, if I'm to believe my research, they didn't play at CBGBs until the 90s. So they were certainly influential punk band and likely influenced by many of the artists we talked about today. But a longtime favorite song of theirs is Story of My Life from their debut album, I believe. Just a great song. And
I love that song.
Yeah, it's awesome. So that's from their 1990 album titled Social Distortion.
Yeah, that's such a great song. I also went the CBGB's route. I found out in doing my research that the Beastie Boys were a CBGB's band, and that they basically started out as a punk band before they kind of changed their thing and became obviously a rap group and a really important New York City rap group that everybody knows about now. But they started at CBGB's, which was a surprise to me. And although when you think back to the time frame of it all, the song that I picked for the playlist is Brass Monkey, which is a very famous Beastie Boys song. By the way, it's the song that in my conversation with Tommy, he told me that's my favorite Beastie Boys song. So when I realized I was doing Beastie Boys, I had to pick Brass Monkey for that reason. It's in honor of my son Tommy. But that album, Licensed to Ill, came out in 1986. And if they were playing CBGBs a few years before that, it makes perfect sense. It's in that same time frame that Gabriel talked about. We should have asked him if he knew those guys, because he probably did.
Yes, probably did. Great choice. And we can thank Tommy for that, maybe.
Absolutely. I'm good. He's one of those guys I can't get to listen to the podcast, but I might be able to get him to at least listen to the last few minutes. Once again, thanks to Gabriel Rotello for being a special guest on this episode of Third Song In. Please look for the CBGB Conspiracy wherever you buy your books. You can also find that book as well as his nonfiction work and all kinds of other information about Gabriel and his life at GabrielRotello.com. We have links on our As Mentioned page. Go there. You can link directly to the Amazon page. You can go directly to GabrielRotello.com. I cannot believe we just interviewed a guy who said, I opened for the Ramones.
It really is. And I mean, Gabriel is such a fascinating guest. I'm still kind of in awe that we were able to get him. So I'm hoping our listeners enjoyed as much as we did.
Me too. Me too.
Third Song In is recorded in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Joliet, Illinois, and Danbury, Connecticut.
Please email us your questions, your comments, and your suggestions for themes or future guests to thirdsongin@gmail.com.
Look for our website, thirdsonginpodcast.com. All kinds of stuff on there, but what we're going to emphasize today is the As Mentioned, where you'll see all the links to Gabriel and the amazing work that he's put out.
Please follow, rate, and review the podcast on all the platforms, wherever you listen to it, on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, YouTube Music. You can find us on Pandora and Overcast. On all of those platforms, you can review us. Please do that. And in the spirit of the episode, I'm going to say, give us your fucking stars, give us your fucking stars, give us your fucking stars.
I thought I had it where I wasn't going to laugh today, but you took it to a whole nother level. Check out our playlists. We just made one of the coolest playlists we've done over the 13 seasons of Third Song In. And I'm guessing we have the only playlist on these streaming services that's going to be entitled The Coolest Playlist in Hell. It's out there. Share our playlists and spread the word because we got some good stuff going on out there.
You can also find us on Facebook, on Instagram, and Blue Sky. Please follow our social media accounts. You can find information about Third Song In, but more importantly, you can find information, dates, and details about all of our past and future guests. Please support the people who support Third Song In.
You can also follow us on Substack. That's where Tom and I post our blogs. We take turns writing one each week. If you go to Substack and search for Third Song In, you can subscribe to us, and we will send you the blog each and every Friday morning.
You've been listening to Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek. Thank you for listening. Former and future guests. So it's a great way to find out what Third Song In guests are doing now.
Absolutely. Another way you can find out what we're...
That was the fucking dumbest sentence ever put together by a human being in a podcast. Jesus.
I'm not sure that's true, but I've put together some pretty dumb sentences.
We're going to have to do an Eggie for just the dumbest shit we ever said. And I think I may have taken the lead.
There's one we did not too long ago. That was like, what the hell are you talking about? You're just putting
blah, 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 blah. Just stop making noises.